It's hard to believe in all these years of forecasting the weird and wonderful possible Nintendo antics of deep diving obscure properties and roots back for old franchises. I've never talked about one of the most speculated and beloved Nintendo properties of all, the Mother or EarthBound series. There are, of course, good reasons for this. Firstly, on a pragmatic level, I tend to try to either know a lot of stuff about a topic, whether through prior knowledge or research before speculating. There's a reason that in the channel's history there have been multiple videos on Camelot software planning, but I've yet to do a deep dive on HAL Laboratory. There's simply so much to research with HAL that while I'm interested in it, and it'll happen one day I'm sure, I'm loath to jump into a video simply for the sake of doing one. However, while I'm sure there will be people far more familiar with the Mother fandom than me who may have perspectives on this video, I thought that after all this time it was worth at least looking into. The second reason is that anything new from this series seemed like a long shot for a great many reasons. The first two Mother games, or Earthbound Beginnings and Earthbound as they're better known, hit Nintendo Switch Online in 2022. Mother 3 hit the Japanese Nintendo Switch Online in 2024. Only the Super NES Mother 2 received a contemporaneous Western translation during the 1990s and 2000s. The first game, Earthbound Beginnings, received a translation on the Wii U Virtual Console to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the original game. The non-translation of the 2006 Game Boy Advance classic Mother 3 became a source of ongoing jokes, not least from Nintendo themselves, and it does appear that sincere efforts were being made to bring Mother 3 to the West in translation, efforts that apparently hit a brick wall. There are many reasons I've seen touted as for why, from frequent potential copyright infringements to themes which might generate controversy in the West, but if it were coming, surely the 2024 release of the Nintendo Switch Online version in Japan would have been the best time. What complicates Mother especially is that while it was made in collaboration with Nintendo, the creator Shigesato Itoi is not primarily a games developer and is in any event pushing 80. The distinctive nature of the games is such that sequels would feel out of place, even gauche, although there are a great many spiritual successes including, most famously, Undertale. That game creator's Toby Fox has worked with Nintendo and once wanted to see if he could assist with Mother 4, but ultimately, meeting Itoi made Fox realize that nobody else could make a Mother game, and he ultimately never even asked whether he could be involved with one. Over the years, there has been a steady stream of merchandise and regular commemorations of anniversaries, but themed noodles probably isn't at the top of the wish list for most people when it comes to Mother games. There remains three major projects that fans might want, and all seem incredible long shots, but let's address these in turn. Firstly, Mother 4. With Itoi ruling one out, I don't think Nintendo would ever want to show disrespect by booting up another one purely for commercial reasons, and they would probably receive a lot of criticism even if they did, and besides, who would work on it? Toby Fox is probably the only person whose standing and reputation might, with Itoi's blessing, feel legitimate, but he has ruled it out, and with Deltarune on the slate, it's unlikely to change his mind. Also, while the spirit of the game's humor and irreverence could be replicated, the satire of late 20th century American lifestyle is very much of its time. I don't see any likelihood of Mother 4 at all. Secondly, a Mother 3 localization outside Japan. It appears likely that Nintendo got some way towards doing this, and of course there is also a fan translation. But if Nintendo wanted to pull the trigger, their moment has surely passed. It seems probable that the costs involved with such a project would far outstrip the rewards for a series that ultimately is not destined for a re-release in any form in terms of a major new game, and so the long-term financial rewards are likely to be very small indeed. Nintendo has put a good amount of effort into franchises that could have a long-term future, such as Metroid, even if they're in the moment low selling. But they're a business looking for a return on investment and not a charity. A translation effort on its own might be worth it as a bauble for the online service, but if it generates any kind of controversy whatsoever, or if there are any ancillary legal costs, it's not just that costs escalate while the rewards remain fairly fixed, but that the costs aren't actually fully knowable. Nintendo is a very cautious company and one that runs on broad consensus, and my suspicion is that the number of sign-offs needed for such a niche project will probably keep it off the table indefinitely. Now, there is a precedent of making this kind of thing work. Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon of the Blade of Light was localized and released on Nintendo Switch as an eShop download available from December 2020 to March 2021 for the sum of $5.99. You could imagine something as unique and well regarded as Mother 3 at least attracting a significant enough number of curiosity downloads that the translation costs might be covered manageably, but not those ancillary costs of making amendment to make the localization work, amendments that would after all require Itoi's involvement and sign-off. If there were going to be an effort to make this work, there could hardly have been a better time in the early 2020s, with the games being released on Nintendo Switch Online and Itoi still appearing to be in good health. I wouldn't even rule out then using the 2022 Western release of the EarthBound titles as a litmus test for the residual interest in the series. After all, you would expect many fans to at least check out the game. Now, perhaps they thought that they could release the Japanese version and worry about a localization at a later point. Shadow Dragon the Blade of Light was nearly 2 years later in the West than on the Nintendo Classics in Japan after all. But consider also the unusual context of that title, released mid-pandemic when Nintendo had huge demands for consoles but was struggling to get new games out of the door. Mother 3 hardly fits in with their aims for 2026, it seems to me. Reggie Fils-Aimé has confirmed this since leaving, saying that the business case for the release of Mother 3 was just not strong enough, and this seems fully justifiable. Will this change in the future? Sadly, I think it's very unlikely, but there is one more option. What about a remake? With Smash elevating Earthbound characters to superstardom, at least in Nintendo fan circles, and with the possibility of a claymation look or other kind of appearance that would make these games last the ages now being completely makeable in terms of the new Switch 2's graphical capabilities, would this be a good option? Re-releasing 3 titles would certainly ameliorate any costs involved in localizing Mother 3, and as Itoi has expressed his desire for millions to be able to play the games, it would certainly open the series up to a new audience and leave a legacy that could last a lot longer than the original games, which, while amazing, are also looking pretty dated on current hardware. However, this also has problems. For one thing, Itoi's involvement would necessarily be limited, and it would remove the very close focus he had on the original project. It would be a different kind of thing, valuable and interesting in its own right probably, but would it truly capture the soul of the first games? When remaking Link's Awakening, it's possible to argue that Link has changed and evolved over the years, so that seeing him in a new style with a remade form kind of works. But the level of scrutiny on a remake for Mother would be huge, and inevitably some people of the niche fanbase would be disappointed, probably, knowing the internet, loudly so. All that said, it might be worth mounting if all people were interested and willing. It's significant to me that the first 2 Mother titles didn't arrive on Nintendo Switch Online until more than 3 years after the system's debuted. Holding back classic games might have had perfectly reasonable justifications, such as wanting to have a big event drop up their sleeve for later on, and probably the addition of coordination with Itoi that might have been required could have made this a lower priority, something that they just didn't need to get to, given how many other Super NES titles there are to release. Still, another reason is that there could have been serious considerations about some kind of remake project around this time. After all, Super Mario RPG was held back, and in 2023 it became clear as to why when a full remake was revealed. Link's Awakening took years to reach Nintendo Classics Game Boy, probably to give the 2019 remake the clearest run. If Nintendo were even discussing a more ambitious Earthbound project, even if it never came to light, the time could not have been more propitious. Business was booming. Mother merchandise had been showing signs of success since the Hobonichi Mother project began in 2020. I would guess that there were discussions had at this time about at least the possibility of doing something more with the series. I think that was the moment where a project could have been commissioned. Now let's take a moment to conceive what this might have looked like. Theoretically, if a project were to have entered production in 2022, it's likely that it would be completed around 2026. But Nintendo and Itoi might wish to avoid the scrutiny of serial releases and prefer to release the 3 games as one complete trilogy. It's also likely that progress will be quite slow given the large degree of consultation that will be required, the extensive prototyping required, and so we'd probably be looking at a very small focused team, which would elongate development all the more. An obvious target date for an announcement will be the 40th anniversary of the Mother franchise, 2029, with an implied release date between 2029 and 2031. All of this is contingent on a massive, massive if. And if my instinct is correct that the release of the Nintendo Classics games mark the end of the project being put into development, then there's really nothing more to be considered. Except 2029 to 2031 is a long way away, and in the meantime, Itoi is busy selling merchandise quite happily. It would be frankly odd and conspicuous to hold back Mother for a decade after Nintendo Switch Online launched. It would suppress the fan base ahead of the new release, and it would hurt sales in the interim. Therefore, if the timeline I outlined above was agreed in 2022, it seems plausible to me that a remake could have been put into production, and they decided, even at that point, that they decided also to put out the games on NES and Super NES for Nintendo Classics. However, I still think it is an incredibly long shot, and even if a remake was begun, there are simply so many issues to work through, including any changes to make the games work internationally and what updates should be made, which could ultimately scupper the project. If there is ever to be another official Mother game release, I imagine that the late 2020s and perhaps early 2030s are the last point at which this would be plausible. Itoi will be 90 by Mother's 50th anniversary in 2039, and the longer the game goes without this kind of attention, the more difficult it would be, both critically and probably commercially, to justify returning to it. I still think they'll leave it be, and as much as I love the best case scenario dream of a Mother trilogy remake with Itoi's full backing and blessing, the risk inherent to the project makes me suspect it may be better left alone. Based on this, I would guess that there's probably a very low chance, maybe only around 10%, that we will see a new Mother game release, a remake, a Mother 3 localization, or even a new game before the end of 2029. Still, as I said at the top of this video, the most assiduous of Mother fans might have other perspectives, so please do add to the comments if there's something that I have missed. Also, do check out the Patreon for more content, and thank you so much to the Patreon supporters back in the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.